Well, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to our Zoom session. It's a full house today. We have our Zoom session happening, and then we also have a couple of live YouTube sessions. So we want to make sure everybody feels welcome and involved. And as we give folks a minute to get into the session, let's hop on chat. I'd love to hear where you're joining us from. Where do we find you from today? Fort Lauderdale, welcome. Raleigh, Columbus, Ohio. Yeah.
Yeah, Jasper, Indiana.
Hello there, Jasper.
Hello, Audrey.
Our dear friends. Yeah, we have folks from Germany. We have folks from Italy. Yeah, what a great crowd. Welcome for joining us, everyone. Now, just to set the scene, I'd love to hear what really sparked your curiosity to join us today. Everybody's real busy. Everybody's on lots of Zoom calls. But what made you want to invest an hour with us and join our session? Just love to hear what's on your minds as we get into the content here. I know we have CEOs on this call. I know we have women leaders on this call. I know we have heads of HR. Yeah, Elizabeth, changing environment. A lot of young women on my team looking for leadership, and you want more tools to support them. From the women's side, just really being the best that you can be. Claudia, music to our ears. Don't fix the women, fix the system. What a great setup. Yeah, no perspectives. Well, thanks everyone. Let's go ahead and hop in. I'm Audrey McGuckin. I'm the CEO of the McGuckin Group. And I can tell you it's been my life's mission over the last 3 decades to really help organizations unlock the true value of women leaders. And we're going to spend today sharing with you what we've learned along the way. I'm also probably going to share with you some of the biggest mistakes I've made and what I've learned from them. So we'll get into that as well. And so if you've been on any of our sessions, you know that we get pretty passionate about the work we do, but this work's different. The stakes have never been higher, and the stakes are high for organizations. The stakes are high for CEOs, and the stakes are high for society at large. Today's session is for CEOs who are frustrated that they can't move the needle despite investing millions. It's for women leaders who feel like they can't make progress and they're looking for some answers. And so we're going to share with you some of our seminal work on developing women leaders and our unique approach, which is, like I said, really the result of 30 years of practice and 30 years of research, working with thousands of leaders, hundreds of organizations, and dozens of CEOs. And here's what I know. And for those of you that know me, you know I always like to speak the truth. And there's one thing I want you to take away. And Claudia, thank you for that beautiful setup. If you only focus on, as Claudia said, fixing the women and developing the women at the individual level, it simply doesn't work. You can spend millions of dollars on ERG groups. You can spend a lot of dollars on women's conferences. But if you don't tackle this at a system level, it rarely works. So one big takeaway that I want you to really focus on is no matter what, this is a systems issue. And in order to address it, we have to work with the individuals in the system and the system itself. And so if you join us as a CEO, we're going to talk about the system. And if you join us about a women leader, I'm going to disrupt the idea that you only need to work on the women. We're going to teach you some navigation skills. So let's jump in. You've heard me say that there's a lot of work being done, and yet the progress has been excruciatingly slow. We'll talk to many CEOs and they'll say, Audrey, we've been at this for 12 quarters and we just can't move the needle. And the question they're always asking is, why is that? Well, here's our point of view on why that is. Women are much less likely to get the P&L roles or the power roles, but it's the jobs that really lead to the top are very likely to have women in them. It drives me nuts when I hear, when I ask organizations about, tell me how you're doing with gender diversity, and they'll say, we're really great at the manager level and we're doing really, really well. And when I dig into that a little bit more, they're doing well within HR and they're doing well within marketing, but they're not traditionally doing well in these P&L roles. The second reason why we're not making progress is that there's a lack of confidence in the women themselves. We know that a lot of the science and the research around puberty is girls' puberty confidence drops off by 30% more than boys between 12 and 14. And the only way that they get that back is through surrounding themselves with great role models and having access to great people that can really coach them. The third is lack of vision. Only 12% of women CEOs who were interviewed through the Korn Ferry research said that they aspire to be a CEO until somebody asked them. Some of the work that we did with one of our clients a couple of years ago, and I like this example because it's in the past and we can see what the outcome has been. The CFO worked with us on this system issue, and he specifically took our guidance on helping his female leaders, his women leaders, imagine what's possible. He was having a conversation with a director of tax and said, what are your aspirations? And she said, yeah, probably a senior director of tax. And he said, actually, I think what you've got in you is a CFO. I think you can be a CFO in the next 5 to 7 years. And that was a couple of years ago. I was actually just talking to him last week, and he said, Stephanie is actually moving to Singapore. It's her last role before her next role, and a CFO role. So what an incredible story. And that lever of helping women imagine what's possible is so critical. And really what we find is organizations are working against their own gender equity and inclusion. What do we mean by that? Even the most experienced and skilled and driven women, even the organizations that are doing work in this space come up against roadblocks. Let's look at some of those roadblocks. One of them is decision makers don't know how to give the hard feedback. So they give vague feedback versus very specific feedback. Women are not given the resources and taught the skills to navigate a system that's actually stacked against them. And ultimately, women aren't dropping out, they're being pushed out because of bad policies. Let's look at some of the numbers. There's only 28% of managerial positions have women in them across the globe, despite having a population of 50%. Only 7% of Fortune 500 companies have women CEOs. And we're all getting pretty familiar with this statistic. 2.5 million women have left the workplace during the pandemic. And staggeringly, the World Economic Forum is predicting this is going to take 108 years to close the gender gap. So pretty big deal, right? And we believe that we find ourselves in this watershed moment and we need a new way, or we risk getting the same results. And it's time to take a systems approach. And so what do we mean by taking a systems approach? Our Women on the Way program is divided into two areas. One is Compass, and it works at the organization level. We get engaged with executive teams and we really start to figure out what are the practices that are holding the organization back. And then we have a program called Navigator that's really about, now, how do we help women navigate the system? And let's dig in a little bit deeper. We've codified this system problem into 10 key areas. And we're going to look at 2 of these today. I'd love to look at 10. We just don't have the time. But let's look at 2 of them. And this is going to be some incredible takeaways. The first one is vague feedback. Having led hundreds of talent reviews, reviewed hundreds of performance appraisals, what we find is that women are more likely to receive vague feedback than men. Let's talk about what that looks like. I don't know if this looks familiar to folks on this call, but what I've seen in performance appraisals is, for women, things like, you'll get further by being more assertive. You've had a good year. People like working with you. Or her speaking style and approach can be off-putting to some people at times. I've had that feedback myself, but it's really not helpful. And on the other hand, men get feedback that sounds like, you need to deepen your domain knowledge in telecommunications. Once you have that understanding, you'll be able to contribute to the design decisions that impact the customer. And I'm sure you can see the difference. And this is not unusual. We find that this is very, very common. And why is it? What is it what's the phenomena behind this vague feedback? The first is unconscious bias. And this is not a judgment piece. All of us have unconscious bias. And one of the challenges is that people that are reviewing women may never express it in words, yet there are still many people that believe women aren't capable of handling higher level leadership roles. The second is fear. We often hear that in light of the Me Too movement, some men are afraid of giving women that tough feedback. Fear of discrimination. The environment has really driven this level of fear in the system. And that's what we mean by it being a system issue. This third piece is really protective hesitation. And that's really about the fear of hurting somebody's feelings. And then the fourth is, what we hear is, well, there's a lot of defensiveness when we do give feedback. And yet, without the specific feedback, we can't help women advance inside of the system. If a business objective was missed, or a lack of frank feedback deprives a woman of opportunity, that's a tough place for women to be. You know, I was reflecting on this as we got into this session, and just as I was really thinking through what we were going to share, and we have no less than 10 women leaders in our coaching practice who we're coaching, who in some ways were unceremoniously exited from the organization, and they didn't know why. They didn't know why. And it was positioned as something vague, and yet they knew that it was because of this lack of feedback. So imagine the loss of value just because we can't give feedback. And so what can we do about it? How do we level the playing field? Here's what I want you to take away. Teach managers how to give specific feedback. This is men and women. but particularly with women, because of what I've just shared with you, the fears, the biases, the not wanting to hurt people's feelings. Really dial it in, get surgical, and make sure people know how to give feedback. Insist on tying the feedback to business goals, particularly in talent reviews. We talk about moments of truth and we talk about moments that matter. And there's moments of truth in the system, and one of them is in a talent review. And then coach your women how to seek out feedback. And for women on this call who are listening to this, because they want to progress and move ahead, find ways to get that feedback. And when it's vague, ask 3 more questions. And when you don't feel like you have enough feedback, ask for more. And then for organizations, measure the impact. Take a look at your performance reviews. Take a blind look at them, and see what you find inside the organization. When we get it right, there was another piece of research done around women CEOs, and they interviewed 54 women CEOs in organizations across the globe. And all of them said that some of their success came from getting the straight up feedback. One of our clients that we work with in San Jose, we designed a program for them called Clarity. And its purpose was really clarity of feedback for all, men and women. And of the 17 women who were in this program out of 100, 6 of them were promoted into more senior leadership roles within the first year. Imagine the impact you can have. It's significant. I'm going to pause here for just a second, and I'm trying to navigate my screen as well. I'd love to see if anybody has any questions or comments as we unpack this one system issue of feedback, vague feedback, specifically for women. You can go ahead and put your question in the chat or put your comment in the chat, or we'd love to hear from you as well. I'm going to give you a minute.
I'm going to say something really just to participate, because I know this is important. And I'm not surprised in hearing that women would get more vague feedback. And also, like, how important it is to ask questions so that you could, get more clarity or get better feedback. And I was a little more enlightened as to hearing about like our unconscious bias and like what the fears are like around that. Just like having fear of like, of hurting someone's feelings and being a little more, descriptive or even discrimination, which is it's really tough. So I just wonder, like, how do we get around that? How do you navigate? I mean, other than just, I guess, asking more questions, maybe through conversation, you can get the person to feel more comfortable to share something that could maybe, like hurt your feelings or feel discriminatory, but then you'll be able to accept the feedback, because it has more context and you're able to understand it. So yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I think you bring up an important point, right? Which is one of the things that organizations are really trying to focus on is psychological safety. And when there's psychological safety and there's a culture of trust in the organization, you're more likely to get free flowing specific feedback.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know that there's women on this call who are reflecting on their own career. And I know there's women on this call saying, that's right. I haven't got that feedback, and that's made it tough.
Yes, I even feel like aware, like now I feel like I haven't gotten that feedback. I wasn't even aware that, that could be the problem, and that, you know, and then even in my not asking is also perpetuated to the situation. Yeah.
That's right. And I think that's back to this systems issue, right? And it's not a judgment. We're not coming from a place of judgment. This is factual. and if we don't have that self-awareness, how can we fix the system? If we don't make the invisible visible, how can we ever be expected to move the needle? Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm taking from this conversation is not only asking for directed feedback, but giving it. I think that once we start giving it, and it's okay to give that feedback to your manager and even to your team. And I think if we add that as women managers in the working world to how we communicate, we will start getting it back in return. And I guess, what are your thoughts on that approach?
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. And, you know, I always commit to speaking the truth. And I always commit to sharing perspective with our audience and our network. And I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but one of the other systems issues is women supporting other women. And when we go in and work with a lot of organizations, they will say some of the women at the top don't support the women coming up. And so I put that challenge out to all women in senior positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would also have one comment. My impression is that all of us, the men, but probably also the women, give harder feedback or more candid feedback to the people who give the impression that they want to come up in their career. So if somebody comes in and says, I want to be the next CEO, director, VP, whatever, then you say, okay, then I tell you, you need this, yeah. And I think that quite often, probably more men, but also women think of the women that they give feedback that she is maybe not interested so much in the career because she doesn't express it. And I think that's why I love your quote on saying we need to teach the women to say what they want, that they want more, and that they want feedback to get there. Yeah, so that's the one thing. And the other is really, train the men. And I think I was lucky to have some men who said, you know, before I knew that I need to say I want to be on top, that somebody told me, I know you can be on top, and I tell you how. Yeah, so.
Micah, I love that. Thanks for joining us from Hamburg. Thanks for sharing your perspective, and thanks for shining a light on the connection point between this idea of what is it time to ask for now from a woman perspective, right? And ask for what you need, and dream big, and everything's possible. And you know, I think for those of you who have daughters on this call, for those of you who have sisters, for those of you who have mothers, help them dream big. If I can give you an invitation at this specific point, it's help people dream big. Yeah. Let's look at the second system issue. It's this idea of being over-mentored and under-sponsored. I'm going to give folks just a minute to let that sink in. Over-mentored and under-sponsored. What I find is that in the quest to fix the women, or in the quest to get to a solution, one of the first things that bubbles up is, let's put a mentor program in place. And I would say, please don't waste your money. It very rarely has the impact that you need it to have. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. So what's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor? Well, a mentor is going to advise you, and a sponsor is going to advocate for you. I remember one of our clients that I worked with, there was somebody that joined as a customer service representative. And one of the heads of the business unit really saw a lot of potential in her. And he specifically would be in meetings and he would say, what about Claire for that project? Or he would specifically say, this is what I've seen Claire doing, and it's incredible. And so you see the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. But let's look at that in a little bit more detail. Mentorship versus sponsorship. So mentorship is about supporting discussions, and it's about helping women leaders build confidence for their career. But when you have a sponsor, they directly influence the networks and they connect you to higher profile opportunities. The mentor will help you maybe craft a career plan. They'll ask you about your aspirations, but the sponsor will be driving career vision. They'll poke holes in your career plan. They'll ask you why. They'll ask you, why not this? They'll help you dream really big. A mentor will give you suggestions on how do you expand your network? And a sponsor will give you access to their network. I personally sponsor a number of executive women who I have just great affinity with, who I believe in, who I feel have been underserved by society, and I don't mentor them. I sponsor them and I open my network and I give them access to it freely. And that network is not other women largely. It's largely men and it's largely CEOs. And so you see the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And then mentorship, you can expect feedback to support your development. But a sponsor is going to be invested in you personally to help you realize your big dream around this upward movement. And then a mentor will offer ideas on how to find projects. But the story I told you earlier about Claire is that the sponsor will champion you for high visibility projects. Any comments on this idea of mentorship versus sponsorship?
I think this is a key definition for women in management that want to grow, need to understand, because I have a mentor, but I don't want a mentor. I want a sponsor.
Exactly. Right?
Right. So my next challenge is going to be, well, how can I get my sponsor? And let the mentor know, thank you very much. Appreciate your advice.
Right?
Yeah, advise me on who my sponsor should be.
Yeah, and I mean there's a nuance to this, and my role and my mission is to expose that nuance, and expose it as a systems issue. We'll talk more about how do you find those sponsors just in a little bit here. Any other comments?
Yeah, this is Jana from Corber. I never really delineated the two responsibilities. And when you physically see them side by side, it is very clear they are two separate routes to go to support an individual.
Right. And Gina, I know that the organization you work in, right, you're crossing geographic boundaries. You're headquartered in Hamburg, and much of the big decisions get made out of those headquarters. And so it doesn't really do you any good to have a mentor. What you need is a sponsor in a place where those big decisions are getting made.
Right, someone that has a seat at the table.
Exactly.
Audrey, we had a question in the chat that was, how do we teach and encourage leaders to become sponsors?
Yeah, I love that. And it's really part of our program that we call Compass. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. But essentially what you're doing is you're starting with self-awareness. So imagine the power in this room just by exposing the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And then imagine if we can connect to people in the organization who have decision rights and powerful places that they're at the table. Imagine if they can see the value in that shift and the change. And then imagine if you extend the invitation to them to say, who might you have seen some potential in that you would be prepared to sponsor, and show them this list and ask them, are you prepared to open up your network to people in positions? Are you prepared to champion this woman leader for high visibility projects? Their answer will be probably maybe. Their answer will probably be, let me think about that. And their answer will be, let me go and see, who do I have a relationship with? How might I learn more about those women? Because this can't be manufactured, right? You see, sponsorship is about relational equity. Did we have any other questions, Erica?
Sorry, I muted myself. Somebody asked, does it require a different personality to be a sponsor versus being a mentor?
I love that question. And sometimes we'll get the question of, is there certain personalities to be a CEO? No, there isn't. All personalities can be CEO. It depends what kind of CEO the organization needs. And I think the same applies for sponsorship. What we have to get to is we have to get to the sponsors. Why? Why should they care? But we use predictive index as a behavioral assessment, and to speak in behavioral terms, it could be somebody that's a strategic profile. It could be somebody that's tactical. It could be somebody that's an extrovert. It could be somebody that's an introvert. But what it always has to be is somebody that's at the table when these decisions are being made. Thanks, Erica. Any other questions or any comments, or yeah, what's on folks' minds, particularly our CEOs and CFOs and our business leaders?
I have one question. We're just starting with the diversity program at Körber, gender diversity. So I'm leading the gender diversity program. And we start with the mentoring we start with different measures, of course, what we do. One of them is also leadership program, and as part the mentorship program. Do you think you can do something like a sponsorship program, or is that more like, or how could you set that up? Or is that more an individual thing maybe, but you can't put it as a program?
I think that there's a couple of ways you can tackle it. Versus a program. What I mean by that is, how can you build sponsorship capability in your executive leaders? How can you show the value of sponsorship? And you can put some level of programmatic nature to it, but typically when you do that, it fails. If you say Eric Koch should sponsor Gina, that's really not going to work, right? Because Eric doesn't have a relationship with Gina, and so there's a relational piece. So I think that there's some things you can do, and we have a specific way of addressing that with organizations, and it's really through building capability.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
but building the capability basically with the C-level or the top level and say, think about it. Who are the women that you sponsor as of now? Yeah. So we don't assign the women, but we maybe say, everybody of you should have a few, yeah, that they say, okay, I look out for them and I'll check if I can progress their career.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, maybe any other way. I'm open for any feedback.
Of course, of course. And we can get some time after this call as well, Micah.
Okay, thanks, Audrey.
Audrey, there's been a couple of questions in the chat around how do I get access to a sponsor? How do I ask for one? You know, there were some around men sometimes prefer to sponsor men primarily because that's where relationships are held. So how do women get access to that? Can you give some insight there?
Yeah. You know, one of the habits that we see in women leaders is that they have more of a propensity to build networks, and men have a more of a propensity to leverage networks. So I would ask all the women leaders on this call who are wondering, how do I get a sponsor? Well, I would start by leveraging your networks versus just building your networks. I would get a piece of paper out and I would write down, I would draw the org chart and I would say, who are all the people in the organization? Who am I connected to? Who do I need to be connected with? Who can I build a relationship with? Who do I have some affinity with? And start that process of leveraging your network. That would be the first recommendation on how to get started. What else, Erica?
I think we are all caught up in the chat. If we have a few minutes at the end, we may circle back on some feedback questions that I have, but let's see if we have time at the end.
All right. So then some of the takeaways for the leaders on this call, CEOs, CFOs, business leaders, take stock of who you are mentoring and how can you shift that to sponsorship. What are some of the shifts that you can take and what are some of the shifts that you can make to move from being a mentor to a sponsor? For people like Micah who own diversity and inclusion, for people on this call who are wondering, you know, how do I get a sponsor? It's back to this piece around organizationally, let's help women identify authentic sponsors. And there's a very specific way to do it. And we call it navigating the system. And we all want you to be navigators of the system. And we have to make the invisible visible. And we can teach you how to do that. But there's a very specific way that women identify sponsors. And focusing on leveraging relationships versus building them. Erica knows this. One of my towering strengths is I am never afraid to ask for something. And very rarely will somebody say no. So who do you know that you have a relationship with? You could ask. The other thing I would encourage is to focus more on careers than jobs within your sponsored relationship. You know, dream big in those sponsor conversations. If you're a sponsor, press and prod and say, you know, I see more in you. I think you're capable of more, and really push to a level of discomfort, and focus on careers versus jobs. Yeah. And so as we think about this idea of this system, and we've talked about this being a systems issue, and we think this is a 2 + 2 = 5, meaning When you do work on the system through Compass, and you do work on Navigator, which is the women, the value is massive. And so let me talk about what I mean by that. Compass it's really designed to get into the organization. I call it get into the organization with a surgical scalpel and say, where are the problems? Where are the problems inside the organization? Where are some of the problems inside of Cardinal Health? Where are some of the problems inside American Airlines? Where are some of the problems inside of Nike? I know you're all on this call. And how can we surgically pinpoint where the problems are in the organization? In addition, Navigator works at the women leader level. And we do this through a peer development program that's really led by experts. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to teach you how to navigate the system. All of the questions that you guys have asked, we teach in our Navigator program. Let's look at it in a little bit more detail. Compass. So when we go into an organization, one of our clients is Humana. We go in and we start with some diagnostics. We interview the CEO. We talk to the executive team. We have a trademarked survey that we do across the organization. And then we have listening sessions. And we take all of that data and we codify it into your red, yellow, green on where are you doing okay? Where are you doing great? And where are your hotspots? And then we get the team together. That can sometimes be a CFO and his direct reports, can sometimes be a CEO and his direct reports, but at some level of executive team, we come in the room, we share the insights, we wrestle them to the ground, we debate them hard, and then we help you design a blueprint for the next 12 to 24 months, which is where are you going to spend your time? And largely, it's not going to include things like an ERG group. It's not going to include things like a mentorship program. It's not going to include things like a women's leadership conference. It's going to include systematic changes you need to make inside the organization. And then phase 2 of that Compass program really depends on what comes out of the blueprint. There might be some coaching, there might be some talent strategy, realignment, mindsets might be at the root of the issue. Or we may need to do some teaching with men on how to develop women leaders, particularly if it's a male-oriented environment. And I know that I have a couple of CEOs on here that are in a male-oriented environment. And so there'll be some big systematic changes that need to take place if you want to move the needle. If you're serious about this and you care about this, then you need to put your money where your mouth is, and we need to take action. So that's Compass. So that's at the organizational level. Let's look at Navigator. This is for all our women leaders on this session who are wondering, what do you mean by navigating the system? Well, how we really approach this is we have a curated 12-month journey. The reason it's 12 months is you can't change muscle memory in one session. It has to happen over time, and there has to be some space for practice. And so it's 12 months of curated content. Additionally, you get access to an incredible group of peers. And so each cohort has 50 women leaders in the session. So there'll be people like Humana, there'll be people like Microsoft, there'll be people like Thermo Fisher, there'll be people from small wine distribution companies in San Jose. There'll be people from engineering companies in the Midwest. And so imagine the richness of the learning that takes place with all of those women. I mean, I'm sure we've got women wanting to jump out their chair right now and get engaged in a conversation. And, you know, imagine if you had the forum to do that. And so access to some pretty distinguished facilitators. Holly on our team was the Chief Innovation Officer for P&G. We have the ex-Chief Legal Officer for Centene, who's a Fortune 17 organization. So you're going to have access to some pretty powerful leaders teaching in the program. And what does it look like? It's 12 months. And there's a lot of work we do on self-awareness, right? Which is, who are you? What's your story? And what do you want your brand to be? For our women leaders who are on this program that have worked with me personally on an individual level, you'll recognize that piece, right? It's the starting point. The next piece in the journey is really around your big dream. The reason that's in there is that we know, because of women's confidence levels, they don't dream big enough. And so this is the forum where we help you dream big. In January, you'll see seeing the system and making the invisible visible. I'll have people say to me, I didn't know there was a system. I knew there was some politics, but I really didn't think about it like a system. And then unless you shift your thinking, it's hard to navigate the system. I'm not going to go through all of these, but the confidence to be bold. What is it time to ask for now? And who do you need to ask? And then this last piece, the leader in you. We know that one of the system's issues is women supporting other women. And so we dial that in pretty hard at the end of this, which is, who are you going to pave the way for in your organization? Who are some of the up and coming women leaders that need to benefit from some of your mentorship, that need to benefit from some of your coaching, that need to benefit from some of your input and insights? And so we talk about that at the end of this session. So it's 12 months. There are 2 full day sessions in Navigator. One is in November and one is in June. There are 2 half day sessions. Those are done virtually. And then there's 5 or 6 90-minute sessions, and they're all curated with this notion of, how do we help women navigate the system, knowing that there is a system? So let me pause there, Erica. I'm going to ask you if there's any questions, or let's hear from folks.
While people are processing, one of the questions back to vague feedback that was put into the chat was, what are some helpful questions to ask when given vague feedback? You had said, ask 3 more questions. So what are some examples of questions you can ask?
Yeah, and so if I got some feedback around, you're doing pretty well, things seem to be going okay, I'm quite happy with how things are progressing, then I might say, well, let's talk about the transformation project I was working on. What went really well with that from your perspective, and what could I have done differently in that transformation project? So I would always go into that asking for more feedback, having done your homework. You're not just going to go in and say, oh, well, can you give me more feedback? That's annoying. What you really want to say is, what about that transformation project? Or what about when I worked on the digital project? Or what about when I worked on this? What went well from your perspective, and what could I improve on? And so then you really get your manager and leader reflecting.
I love that. One question we got about the programs is, can you join Navigator without your company doing Compass?
That's a great question. We have had many conversations about this one, many conversations. And my first reaction is, I like to say, no, absolutely not, because this is a systems issue. And yet, I still can imagine the huge value of teaching women how to navigate the system, right? And imagine the momentum that we create if we have women more educated on the system. Imagine the momentum that we create when we make the invisible visible. And one of the things that we're doing is when folks join us in the Navigator program and their company hasn't invested in Compass, we go back after 30 days to the CEO and we say, here's generally some of the things that we're seeing in Navigator. Is that even possible that that's happening in your organization? And so we have some plans to get around that. But the answer is, yes, you can join Navigator if your organization hasn't signed up for Compass. And yet the Compass is so critical because we believe it's a systematic issue.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, you know, of course, the exponential growth factor is the 2 + 2 = 5. Sorry, my math nerds, that's actually not exponential, but you get what I mean. They that does come from doing them together. But we do know that sometimes we might have to get that momentum in the system. Of what we know is when they start to see the results, when your manager sees the difference, when the organization starts to see that, they're going to ask why. And so those of you who are like, I don't think my company will get involved in Compass just now, but I would love to do Navigator. You get to be the influencer. You get to influence from the inside out. You get to be really the tip of the spear in the beginning of some of that journey. So I definitely would encourage you to apply and to look at being a part of that and being a real innovator in the organization.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. And so as we start to wrap up here, there's a couple of ways you can engage with us. I know that folks have been asking in the chat. If you have any responsibility for organizational change, if you're a CHRO, if you're a head of HR, if you are head of diversity and inclusion, we'd love to work with you on Compass. Let's set up time. Let's get you going with a foundational Compass program. Let's get started. If you're joining as an individual leader and you want to continue to learn these navigation skills that we've given you a small window into, let's talk about you joining our 12-month program. You can apply on our website at www.wotwjourney.com, or you can send us an email. But let's get connected and see how we can get you in the program. Or if you're simply interested in some of the content, let us know in the chat and we'll send you a concept document that talks about some of these shifts that you can see in the system. So lots of ways to get involved. We think this is pretty unique in the market. There's lots of women leader programs that are designed to fix the women. There's lots of cheese and cracker opportunities, and we just don't think that makes a difference. And we have a pretty strong point of view on that. We think it's a systems issue and it has to be attacked in two ways. And so we're pretty excited about some of the companies that we've got on board already. And we just literally, we just took it to market. It's been in the making since January. We actually brought our consumers to the product design process. You know, we had women leaders from Microsoft and Thermo and Intel and many organizations, and they helped us design this program. And so this is consumer designed with all of you in mind. I want to say thank you to everybody that joined this session. Thank you for those on our live YouTube. We had to expand this out because we were pretty limited. It was so great to have you, and I'd love to work with you. I'd love to work with the CEOs on this call. I'd love to work with you women leaders. Let's get this going and let's make a difference.